Using your 19mm socket, let's go ahead and remove the lug nuts. Once these are all off, we'll take the wheel off. Using a 21mm socket, you want to go ahead and remove this bolt here and repeat for the same up on the top. Be prepared once that bolt comes out that caliper and bracket will be loose. So go ahead and support that. Pull that bolt out. And we're going to use a hanger to remove the entire caliper. Wiggle it off the rotor. I'm going to go ahead and support this off the upper control arm. Let's go ahead and remove the rotor and set that aside. Using a 36mm socket, go ahead and remove the axle nut. And go ahead and remove the washer as well. I'm just using a pick just to hook around it. Set that aside. Using an E16 socket, which is an inverted Torx, I'm going to go ahead and remove this bolt here. There's another one located at 12 o'clock and down around the other side at about 5 o'clock. And repeat for the other two. So with all three bolts loose, we're going to go ahead and back those out. You want to take them out just enough where you can still see the threads in the flange, but not remove them all the way. We're going to go ahead and remove this wheel hub. You have two options on how to do this. With the bolts still installed, but yet visible through the front of the hub flange itself, you can use your socket extension. You want to go ahead and rotate the knuckle accordingly. Put the extension on the back on that bolt and strike the back side here using the bolt to push the hub out of the knuckle. You can see a little bit of a gap here, and you'd work your way around to the other bolts. Now, if that isn't working for you, you can also use a hammer or a dead blow hammer or something to that effect to hit the back side of the flange outward, working your way all the way around to pull the hub out of the knuckle, like so. As this starts to come out, go ahead and remove the bolts off the back. Once that last bolt is out, hold the hub, give it a few whacks. Work the hub free on the spline of the CV axle, and there's your hub. Using a 21mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove the outer tie rod nut. You're going to use our hammer, strike the edge of the knuckle here, and pop that tie rod end up. Using an 18mm socket, go ahead and remove the lower nut on the sway bar end link. Go ahead and tap that bolt out. So I'm going to use a 21mm socket on the clevis bolt, and on the forward part of the bolt is a 17mm. Go ahead and remove that nut, set that aside. Now once you have your vehicle supported, as you probably already do on jack stands, you want to go ahead and use your regular jack to put underneath the lower control arm. We're going to slightly go ahead and put some pressure on this control arm and slowly lift it up just a little bit. What we're doing is releasing all of the strut pressure on the control arm just so it's not dropped all the way. Now you know you're in a good position by raising the control arm if you can just pull that clevis pin or the clevis fork bolt right out. So I'm going to go ahead and relocate the caliper hook here. I want to put this someplace where we can remove the additional weight off of this upper control arm. Using a 21mm socket, let's go ahead and loosen the upper control arm bolt here. I want to keep it on a few threads here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bonk the upper knuckle here to release the control arm. Be careful once this releases from here, because now the only thing holding this knuckle is the lower ball joint. When you release this will swing, the knuckle will swing out. Now I want to go ahead and lower the jack. Now on the inboard portion of the CV axle, I want to go ahead and put a pry bar up against the CV axle and the diff and just gently pop this out. You'll feel it snap out and you'll have some play like that. Now we'll continue to pull the axle out. And try to work that up. And then we'll work the knuckle down and get that CV axle removed. You have to work the axle down around the clevis fork. I'm going to go ahead and feed the axle through. We want to get the axle underneath. Work the inner part of the CV axle up and into the differential here. Once we have the axle popped into the knuckle, go ahead and line this up. Hold that in place. So what we're going to do now is apply some pressure to the lower control arm. And we're going to work that clevis fork back into place. So what we want to do is go ahead, we can line up our clevis bolt. And if this isn't lining up perfect, we can line this up and just tap that. And go ahead and get the wheel hub lined up, slide it onto the axle, work that in, lining up the bolts on the flange. Once we have the bolts cleaned and we have our anti-seize on there, we can go ahead and start those into the back and thread the bolts in to the hub. Once you get all 3 bolts started, go ahead and grab your ratchet, and you can use these 3 bolts to evenly pull that hub into the knuckle. I want to go ahead and torque these bolts down to 96 foot-pounds. And repeat for the other 2. Let's go ahead and tighten up this upper control arm ball joint nut. Install the outer tie rod. So our ball joint was spinning inside, so we couldn't tighten up this nut. So we're going to use is a 21 millimeter wrench on the nut, and then we're going to hold the bottom with a 10 millimeter. So in trying to line up the sway bar end link with the control arm, the holes don't line up. So what we're going to do is use our jack to raise the control arm just a little bit to get these holes to line up. And go ahead and put the washer on, get our nut started. We'll go ahead and snug that down. And then we'll lower the jack. I want to go ahead and torque the tie rod nut to 80 foot-pounds. I'm going to torque our sway bar end link bolt to 100 foot-pounds. Our lower clevis fork to control arm is 110 foot-pounds. I'm going to put our 17 millimeter wrench on the bolt head torque this down. I'm going to torque the upper control arm to the knuckle to 60 foot-pounds. Go ahead and install our brake rotor. Grab our caliper and bracket. And position this so we can go ahead and put our brake pads back in. Push that rotor on. I'm going to go ahead and get the upper bolt started. Get it a few threads and then repeat for the lower. Might have to work that unit back and forth. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and torque the caliper to knuckle bolts to 100 foot-pounds and repeat for the top. Go ahead and get your washer installed. Get the axle nut threaded on. Let's go ahead and snug that down. I'm going to go ahead and spin on a couple lug nuts here. I'm going to thread them down as far as we can get them. Now using a pry bar and your torque wrench, we'll go ahead and torque that axle nut to 100 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and get that wheel installed. We're going to start all of our lug nuts by hand to prevent any cross-threading. I'm going to go ahead and torque the wheels down to 95 foot-pounds.